The shame of being broken never leaves a man. It settles into his bones like winter cold, a constant ache that no amount of whiskey or solitude can cure. Colonel Garrett Blackwood knew this truth better than most. At 58 years old, he had survived 2 tours in Vietnam, a decade in the Gulf, and 30 years of military service that had carved deep lines into his weathered face. But he had never survived the one thing that mattered most in his world. He had never shifted, never felt his wolf emerge, never become what every other man in his bloodline had been since the dawn of time. Tonight, standing in the shadows outside the great hall of the Silver Ridge Pack, watching his son crown another woman as his Luna, Garrett felt that old wound tear open fresh. The hall blazed with torchlight and ceremony. 7 allied packs had gathered for this coronation, their alphas seated in positions of honor, their warriors lining the stone walls in full ceremonial armor. The air hummed with power, with the collective strength of hundreds of wolves gathered in one sacred space. Garrett could sense the primal energy even from outside, could feel what he would never truly be part of. He watched through the tall arched windows as Marcus Stoneheart, his son, stood before the assembled packs. 35 years old, and every inch the alpha that Garrett had trained him to be. Broad shoulders carrying the weight of leadership with the same discipline Garrett had hammered into him during 1,000 training sessions. The same tactical mind that could assess a battlefield in seconds and make decisions that saved lives. The same code of honor that put duty above desire, sacrifice above self, responsibility above everything else. But tonight, watching his son place the moonstone crown on Victoria Silvermane's head instead of on the woman who truly deserved it, Garrett wondered if he had taught Marcus the wrong lessons entirely. The crowd erupted in howls of approval as Victoria accepted her new title. She was beautiful in the way that political marriages always demanded. Perfect posture, perfect smile, perfect breeding from one of the most powerful families in the territory. Her father, Aldrich Silvermane, stood beside the council members with the satisfied expression of a man who had just won a very long game of chess. 60 years old and still sharp as broken glass, his presence dominated the room even more than the young Alpha and his new Luna. Garrett's tactical mind, honed by decades of military command, tracked the power dynamics playing out before him. He noted which pack alphas sat closest to Aldrich, which warriors carried themselves with the bearing of men who had seen real combat versus those who had only trained in peacetime. He identified security weaknesses in the hall's layout, potential choke points if things went wrong, and at least 5 council members who looked distinctly uncomfortable with the proceedings. Something was wrong with this coronation, something beyond the personal betrayal that made Garrett's chest ache. His son had a true mate. Garrett had discovered this 3 weeks ago purely by accident when he had overheard a conversation between 2 pack healers near the boundary stones. They had been speaking in hushed tones about Elena, a young woman of 23 who carried Marcus's child. The mate bond had snapped into place between them 10 months ago at a territorial gathering, instant and undeniable as these things always were. But Marcus had already been negotiating his alliance with the Silvermane family, already committed to a path that put pack politics above personal truth, already making the same mistakes Garrett had made 40 years ago. Garrett's wife Sarah had been his true mate. He had felt it the moment they met, a connection that transcended his inability to shift, a bond that made him feel complete despite being unable to access his wolf. But duty had called. The pack had needed political alliances. Garrett's father, the beta at the time, had pushed for a different match, and Garrett, young and desperate to prove himself worthy despite his defect, had almost walked away from Sarah to do what was expected. He had chosen differently in the end, had claimed his mate and damn the consequences. It had cost him his father's respect and his position in the pack hierarchy, but it had given him 30 years with a woman who saw past his defect to the man underneath. Then rogues had torn her apart 10 years ago while Garrett watched, helpless in his human form, unable to shift and defend the woman he loved. The memory burned through him like acid. Sarah's screams, the scent of blood, his own useless human hands trying to stop wounds that only a wolf's healing could survive. The rogues had laughed at him before they fled, mocking the pathetic human who could not protect his own mate. Marcus had been 25 then, already an alpha, already powerful in ways his father would never be. He had hunted those rogues down and executed them with the cold precision Garrett had taught him. But he had looked at his father differently after that night, with pity, with disappointment, with the quiet weight of having a defective man for a bloodline. Tonight, standing alone in the darkness while his son celebrated with a woman who was not his true mate, Garrett understood that Marcus was trying to be stronger than his father, trying to choose duty over personal desire in a way Garrett never could, trying to protect himself from the vulnerability that came with genuine love, and in doing so, destroying 3 lives instead of 1. The ceremony concluded with traditional oaths and blood bonds. Victoria pressed her palm to Marcus's, their blood mingling in the ancient ritual that bound Alpha to Luna before witnesses. The crowd howled again, a sound that rattled the windows and made Garrett's human ears ring. He should leave, should retreat to his cabin on the boundary and drink himself into forgetting. But something held him in place, some instinct honed by decades of combat that whispered of danger approaching. Then he felt it, a burning sensation in his chest that had nothing to do with emotion and everything to do with something breaking open inside him. Pain lanced through his ribcage like shrapnel. His vision blurred. His knees buckled and he caught himself against the stone wall, gasping for air that suddenly felt too thick to breathe. What the hell was happening to him? The sensation passed after a moment, leaving him shaking and covered in cold sweat. Old war wounds, he told himself. Stress. Age catching up with a body that had survived too much combat. He pushed away from the wall and forced his breathing to steady. He was a colonel in the United States Army, retired or not. He did not break down. He did not show weakness. He endured. The first gunshot cracked through the night air like a branch snapping. Garrett's training took over before conscious thought. He dropped into a combat crouch, assessing vectors and threat sources. The shot had come from the east, near the outer territories where packland bordered the wild zones. Not close enough to threaten the Great Hall directly, but close enough to be a problem. More shots followed, accompanied by screams and the distinctive snarls of wolves in combat. Rogue attack. His radio crackled to life. He still carried it, a habit from his military days, monitoring pack security frequencies even though he held no official position. Marcus's voice came through, clipped and commanding. All units respond to Sector 7. Multiple hostiles, civilian casualties. I repeat, multiple hostiles engaging our wolves in Sector 7. Garrett did not hesitate. His cabin was a quarter-mile away, and he covered the distance at a run that would have impressed men half his age. Inside, he grabbed his tactical vest, his rifle, ammunition, and the combat knife that had saved his life in 3 different war zones. He was moving on pure instinct now, the muscle memory of 1,000 firefights overriding the logical voice that said he was a 58-year-old human heading into a supernatural battle where he had no business being. But those screams were coming from pack territory, from families he had known for decades, from wolves who had tolerated his presence despite his defect because he had once been married to one of them, because his son led them, because decades of military service had taught him to be useful even without a wolf. He would not hide while they died. The ambush site was chaos when he arrived. 6 rogues, all in wolf form, had cornered 3 pack warriors near the boundary stones. The warriors were young, maybe early 20s, with more enthusiasm than experience. They fought bravely, but the rogues were older, meaner, and clearly coordinated in ways that suggested military training of their own. Garrett took in the tactical situation in seconds. The rogues had positioned themselves with the warriors' backs to a cliff face, eliminating escape routes. Classic pincer movement. 2 rogues engaged directly while the others circled, waiting to exploit any opening. The pack warriors were bleeding, tiring, moments from being overwhelmed. He sighted down his rifle and fired. The first shot took a rogue in the shoulder, spinning the creature around with a yelp of surprise. Wolves healed fast from most injuries, but a bullet traveling at 2,700 feet per second still hurt like hell and disrupted combat effectiveness for critical seconds. Garrett worked the bolt, adjusted for windage, and fired again. Second rogue, hit in the haunch, went down snarling. The remaining rogues whirled toward this new threat, and Garrett saw the moment they registered what he was. Human. Alone. Effectively defenseless against their supernatural speed and strength. They charged. Garrett had fought in jungles where the enemy could appear from nowhere and disappear just as fast. He had fought in deserts where death came from long range. He had fought in mountains where every step could be your last, and the cold killed as efficiently as any bullet. But he had never fought wolves with nothing but human reflexes and the absolute certainty that he was about to die. He dropped 2 more with shots that would have made his old drill instructor weep with pride. Tight groupings, center mass, professional execution under pressure. But wolves did not die easy, and these 4 were already too close, moving too fast, jaws wide and eyes blazing with the kind of rage that came from being wounded by prey that should not be able to fight back. The alpha rogue reached him first, massive and scarred, easily 200 pounds of muscle and fury. Garrett swung his rifle like a club, but the wolf batted it aside, and suddenly they were on the ground with jaws snapping inches from his throat. This was how Sarah died, pinned, helpless, human fragility exposed against supernatural power. Not like this. Not after surviving what he had survived. Not after losing Sarah. Not after watching his son throw away genuine love for political convenience. Not powerless. Not again. Not ever again. The rage that exploded through Garrett Blackwood was not entirely human. Something inside him that had been locked away, suppressed, buried so deep he never knew it existed, suddenly tore free. His bones caught fire. His skin split. His vision went white with pain so intense he should have passed out. But instead he felt more awake, more alive, more real than he had in 58 years of existence. The shift was violent, agonizing. His body was rewriting itself at the cellular level, tearing apart and rebuilding in seconds what should have taken a lifetime to develop. He heard his own screams mixing with sounds that were not human, felt his spine extending, his jaw elongating, his hands becoming paws with claws that could rend steel. When his vision cleared, the world had changed. Everything was sharper, colors more vivid, scents more complex. He could smell the rogue's fear mixing with their bloodlust, could hear heartbeats and breathing patterns from 100 yards away, could feel the earth beneath his paws with a sensitivity that bordered on precognition. And he was huge. The rogue alpha that had been about to tear out his throat now stared up at him with something approaching terror. Garrett's wolf form towered over the other creature, easily 300 pounds of black fur and raw power. He could feel strength in his limbs that he had never possessed, could sense instincts flooding his mind with knowledge of how to fight, how to move, how to kill with efficiency that made his military training look like child's play. The tactical part of his brain that never quite shut off even in crisis noted that he was not just reacting on pure instinct. His human consciousness remained fully integrated with his wolf form. His military training, his combat experience, his strategic thinking, all of it merged seamlessly with primal hunting instincts. He was not a wolf pretending to be human or a human pretending to be a wolf. He was both, completely, simultaneously, and the combination was devastating. The rogues broke and ran. Garrett pursued on instinct, his wolf demanding that threats be eliminated, that territory be defended, that pack be protected. He caught the alpha rogue within 50 yards, his greater size and fresh strength overwhelming the other wolf's experience. The fight lasted seconds. Garrett's jaws found the throat, his combat training telling him exactly how much pressure, exactly which angle, exactly when to twist. The rogue went down and did not get up. The remaining rogues scattered into the wildlands beyond the boundary, and Garrett's wolf wanted to chase, wanted to hunt, wanted to finish what had been started. But his human mind reasserted control, pulling him back, forcing him to check on the 3 young warriors who had been his reason for coming here in the first place. They stared at him with expressions mixing awe and disbelief. One of them, a young male with blood matting his brown fur, shifted back to human form. "Colonel Blackwood, sir!" His voice was shaking. "You shifted. You actually shifted, but you have been unable to shift your entire life. How is this possible?" Garrett tried to answer and realized he did not know how to make human sounds with his wolf mouth. He concentrated, reaching for the same instinct that had let him shift in the first place, and felt his body compress, reshape, return to familiar human form. The transition was smoother this time, less agonizing, though he collapsed to his knees in the dirt once it completed. He was naked, covered in blood, shaking like a newborn, but whole, complete, no longer defective. "I do not know," he said, his voice rough from screaming during the shift. "I honestly do not know." The sound of approaching wolves made them all tense, but these were pack members responding to the emergency. Marcus burst into the clearing first, still in his formal coronation attire, flanked by a dozen warriors. He took in the scene with an alpha's quick assessment. The dead rogue, the wounded warriors, his father kneeling naked in the dirt with blood on his hands and the unmistakable scent of a first shift hanging heavy in the air. "Dad?" Marcus's voice carried 100 questions, 1,000 emotions, decades of complicated history compressed into one word. He crossed the clearing in 3 strides and dropped to his knees beside his father, hands reaching out and then stopping, uncertain where to touch, whether to embrace or examine or simply witness. Garrett looked up at his son and saw his own shock reflected back, saw the alpha authority temporarily stripped away, leaving just a man trying to process an impossible reality. Saw for the first time in 10 years something other than pity or disappointment in those eyes. "How?" Marcus asked. "Your entire life. 58 years without a shift. How?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Garrett opened his mouth to answer, to explain, to offer some logical reason for the impossible, but he had no answers, only questions that multiplied with every passing second. The old woman's voice cut through the confusion like a blade. "He was not defective, Colonel. He was silenced. And now the seal is broken." Everyone turned. An ancient wolf stood at the edge of the clearing, human form but radiating power that made even Marcus's alpha presence feel diminished. She was perhaps 85 years old, wrapped in layers of worn fabric, with white hair loose around her shoulders and eyes that gleamed pure silver in the moonlight. Moira. The pack called her a hermit, a relic, a strange old woman who lived beyond the boundaries and kept to herself. Most wolves forgot she existed. But Garrett had not forgotten. She had been present at his birth, had examined him as an infant and declared him unable to shift with a sadness that his mother never explained, had attended Sarah's funeral and touched his shoulder with a grip that conveyed knowledge beyond words. Now she stepped into the clearing with the authority of age and secrets, her silver eyes fixed on Garrett with an intensity that made his newly awakened wolf want to bare its throat in submission. "Come with me, Colonel Blackwood," she said, "all of you. What happened here tonight is not random chance or late blooming or any comfortable lie you might tell yourselves. This is the consequence of choices made 40 years ago by men who thought they could control what should never be controlled. And if you want to understand why you can finally shift, why your son made the choices he made tonight, why everything you think you know about your pack and your world is built on lies, then you will follow me now." She turned and walked into the darkness beyond the boundary stones, not looking back to see if they would follow. Marcus gave orders for the wounded to be evacuated and the dead rogue's body to be secured for examination. Then he looked at his father, still kneeling in the dirt, still trying to process a transformation that rewrote 58 years of identity. "Can you walk?" Marcus asked. Garrett nodded and stood, accepting the cloak one of the warriors offered to cover his nakedness. His legs felt steady despite everything. His body felt strong, felt right in ways it never had before. He looked at his son and saw the questions burning there, saw the carefully controlled alpha exterior struggling to contain very human confusion. "We should hear what she has to say," Garrett said, "because she is right about one thing. This was not random chance. I have survived too many battles to believe in coincidence." They followed Moira into the wild lands, father and son walking side by side for the first time in a decade, with half a dozen warriors trailing behind as security. The old woman's cottage appeared after a quarter-mile of rough terrain, hidden in a grove of ancient pines that seemed to predate human settlement. Light glowed from the windows, warm and inviting, at odds with the tension crackling through the group. Inside, the cottage was larger than it appeared from outside, filled with books and herbs and strange symbols carved into wooden beams. Moira gestured for them to sit at a long table that dominated the central room. She poured tea with the precision of ritual, her movements economical and purposeful. When everyone was seated, when the tea was distributed, when the warriors had stopped fidgeting and Marcus had stopped radiating alpha dominance and Garrett had stopped shaking from adrenaline crash, Moira finally spoke. 1963, the height of the Cold War. The United States government was funding dozens of black operations projects, most of which have never been declassified. One of these projects focused on supernatural entities, specifically on werewolves, on you. She pulled a file from beneath the table, old and yellowed, marked with classification stamps that Garrett recognized from his military career. Top secret, eyes only, destroyed after reading. Except someone had not destroyed these files. Someone had kept them for 40 years, waiting. Project Silverback, Moira continued, opening the file to reveal photographs and documents. Objective was to create enhanced soldiers by suppressing wolf genetics and amplifying human combat capability. The theory was that wolves were too volatile, too driven by instinct and pack bonds, too difficult to control in modern warfare. But if you could suppress the wolf while keeping the enhanced strength, speed, and healing, you could create the perfect special operations soldier. Garrett stared at these documents, at photographs of young men in military uniforms undergoing medical examinations, at chemical formulas and psychological conditioning protocols, at lists of names and dates and test results. 200 wolves were selected for the program, Moira said. All young men between 18 and 25. All from military families, all volunteers, though they did not truly understand what they were volunteering for. They were told it was an experimental enhancement program. They were promised advancement, prestige, the chance to serve their country in ways beyond normal duty. She turned a page, revealing a roster. Garrett's eyes found his own name halfway down the list. Blackwood, Garrett. Age 20. Subject 17. Status, 87% suppression achieved. Suitable for field deployment. The room spun. Garrett gripped the table edge, feeling like the ground was dropping away beneath him. He had been 20 years old when he enlisted, had been eager to prove himself, to serve, to become something more than the awkward kid from a pack that valued strength above all else. He remembered medical examinations, injections, long sessions with doctors who asked strange questions about his wolf, about his instincts, about how it felt to shift. He remembered the day his wolf went silent. He had thought it was his fault, had thought he was defective, flawed, cursed by some genetic problem. For 38 years he had carried that weight, had built his entire identity around being unable to shift while having to prove his worth through human achievements. For 38 years he had been a lie. "I do not remember," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I do not remember agreeing to this." "You would not," Moira replied gently. The conditioning included memory suppression, partial amnesia around the procedures. You remember being examined, but not what they did to you. You remember the aftermath, but not the cause. This was intentional. Soldiers who knew they had been violated would resist. Soldiers who thought they were simply defective would comply. Marcus slammed his hand on the table, making the teacups rattle. "Who authorized this? Who ran this program? And why the hell is my father only shifting now, 40 years later, if the suppression was so effective?" Moira turned to another page in the file. This one showed a younger version of a face Marcus knew all too well. Aldrich Silvermane. 40 years younger but unmistakable, wearing a military uniform with the rank insignia of a colonel, standing beside a laboratory facility. "Your father-in-law ran Project Silverback," she said to Marcus. He was the lead researcher, the architect of the suppression technique, and over the past 4 decades, he has placed suppressed wolves in positions of power throughout the pack territories. Council members, military commanders, political leaders, all of them men who think they cannot shift, who are desperate to prove their worth, who can be controlled through their perceived defect and the promise of acceptance. The implications crashed through Garrett like artillery fire. Aldrich Silvermane controlled half the council, controlled the military structure, controlled the political alliances. And he had just bound himself to Marcus through Victoria's coronation, had just secured his position as the power behind the Alpha's throne. "And the suppression breaking?" Garrett asked. "Why now?" Moira's silver eyes met his. "That is the question I have been trying to answer for 10 years. Why did your suppression suddenly fail? What triggered the release after 4 decades of success? I believe it has to do with extreme emotional trauma combined with life-threatening danger. Your wife's death weakened the conditioning. Tonight's attack, the threat to pack members you still care about despite your exile, the rage and helplessness and desperate need to protect, all of it combined to shatter what chemicals and psychology had built." She paused, then added quietly, "You are not the first to break free, but you are the most powerful. Your wolf was not weakened by the suppression. It was compressed, stored, building pressure for 40 years. What emerged tonight is stronger than you would have been if you had shifted naturally at 20. Garrett looked down at his hands. They looked the same as always, scarred from decades of combat, marked by age and hard use, but he could feel the difference now, could sense the power coiled beneath his skin, waiting.
"How many others?" Marcus asked. "How many suppressed wolves are out there?"
"According to these files," Moira said, "roughly 180 are still alive, most in their 50s and 60s now, living with their perceived defect, desperately trying to prove their worth through other means. 20 died during the suppression process. The rest are scattered across the country, many in positions of significant authority." She pulled out one more document, a current list, updated with recent information showing names and locations and positions held. Garrett scanned it and felt sick. Federal judges, military generals, corporate executives, PAC council members across a dozen territories, an entire network of men who did not know they were puppets.
"Victoria does not know," Marcus said suddenly. It was not a question, but Moira answered anyway.
"I do not believe so. But her pregnancy was carefully timed. Her father has been planning this alliance for years, waiting for you to come of age as Alpha, positioning his daughter perfectly. And when you met your true mate 10 months ago, when the bond formed with Elena, Aldrich moved quickly to lock you into the political marriage before you could choose differently." Garrett's head snapped toward his son. Elena, the young woman carrying Marcus's child, the true mate bond that Marcus had rejected for duty. "You knew," Garrett said. "You knew she was your mate, and you crowned Victoria anyway." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I had responsibilities. The PAC needed the Silvermane alliance. We needed their territories, their resources, their political support. Elena has not yet accessed her wolf. She brings nothing but emotional attachment." "She brings truth," Garrett said, and his voice carried the weight of decades of military command. "She brings a genuine bond instead of political theater. She brings the one thing that makes this life worth living. And you threw it away because you were afraid of being vulnerable, because you did not want to end up like me, unable to protect what matters." The words hung between them like a challenge. Marcus stood, alpha dominance radiating from him in waves that would have made lesser wolves submit. But Garrett stood too, and his newly awakened wolf met that challenge with interest. Not submission, not anymore, never again. "You have no idea what it is like to lead," Marcus said, "to make choices that affect hundreds of lives, to sacrifice personal desires for the greater good." "I know exactly what it is like," Garrett replied. "I commanded men in combat for 3 decades. I made decisions that sent soldiers to their deaths. I sacrificed pieces of my soul on altars of duty and honor and mission success. But I never lied to myself about what I was doing. I never pretended that choosing politics over love was anything other than cowardice dressed up in noble language." The warriors around the table looked deeply uncomfortable. Moira watched with her silver eyes, saying nothing, letting the confrontation play out. "Elena is pregnant with your child," Garrett continued. "Your true mate is carrying your heir, and you just crowned another woman, from a family built on lies and suppression and control, because it was easier than fighting for what actually matters. So do not lecture me about leadership, son. I may have been suppressed, but at least I knew the difference between duty and fear." Marcus's control cracked. "You want to talk about fear? I watched you fail to protect Mom. I watched rogues tear her apart while you stood there helpless in your human form. I swore I would never be that weak, never be that powerless. And choosing Elena, choosing to follow a mate bond when she has not yet accessed her own wolf, when she brings no political value, when loving her would make me exactly as vulnerable as you were, that is not strength. That is repeating your mistakes." The truth of it hit Garrett like a bullet to the chest. His son had not just been ashamed of his father's inability to shift. He had been terrified of becoming him, had built his entire approach to leadership around avoiding the vulnerability that came with genuine love. And in doing so had walked right into Aldrich Silvermane's trap. "Gentlemen," Moira said quietly, "this argument can continue later. Right now we have more immediate concerns. Aldrich knows about Project Silverback because he created it. He knows that suppressions can break under extreme stress. He has watchers throughout the PAC territories. By tomorrow morning, he will know that Garrett shifted, and he will move quickly to eliminate the threat before other suppressed wolves realize they can break free." "What kind of threat level are we talking about?" Marcus asked, his alpha training reasserting itself over emotional turmoil. If the 180 surviving subjects learn they were deliberately suppressed, if they discover they can shift with proper triggering, you would have an army of extremely angry, tactically trained, supernaturally powerful wolves who have spent decades in positions of influence. Aldrich's entire power structure would collapse. The councils he controls, the alliances he has built, the carefully constructed hierarchy that keeps him in shadow power, all of it depends on those men never knowing the truth.
So he will kill my father to keep the secret, Marcus said.
He will try, Moira confirmed, and he will likely make it look like a rogue attack or training accident or any number of plausible scenarios. But first, he will move against the other potential weak point in his plans.
Elena, Garrett said.
Moira nodded. She carries Marcus's child, an unbound bloodline with the potential to shift naturally to display the full power of a true mate bond. If she births a child who thrives despite her own wolf remaining dormant, it will raise questions about why so many supposedly unable wolves exist. It will draw attention to the pattern. Aldrich cannot allow that.
We need to get her somewhere safe, Garrett said. Now, tonight.
Marcus looked at his father, and something shifted in his expression. Some of the alpha authority faded, leaving just a man facing an impossible situation. She is at a cabin on the northern boundary, alone. I have been keeping my distance to maintain appearances with Victoria.
Garrett bit back a dozen responses about priorities and choices and what kind of man abandons his pregnant mate. Now was not the time. Strategy first, recriminations later.
How many wolves can you trust absolutely? Garrett asked. How many who are not compromised or controlled by Aldrich?
Marcus considered. 12, maybe 15. Warriors I trained personally. Wolves whose loyalty is to me and the pack, not to political alliances.
That will have to be enough. Garrett turned to Moira. I need a list of other Project Silverback survivors, particularly any with military training who might be willing to fight once they learn the truth.
Already prepared, Moira said, producing another document.
53 names, all veterans, all in positions where they could be valuable allies if properly awakened and recruited.
We do not have time for a recruitment campaign, Marcus said. Aldrich will move within hours, not days.
Then we split priorities, Garrett replied, his tactical mind fully engaged now, running scenarios and calculating odds with the efficiency of a combat veteran. Marcus, you take your trusted wolves and secure Elena. Get her somewhere defensible and keep her there. I will take Moira's list and start reaching out to the others. If we can wake even a handful of suppressed wolves, we change the power dynamics immediately.
You just shifted for the first time tonight, Marcus pointed out. You barely know how to control your wolf. And you want to go up against a conspiracy that has been running for 40 years?
I have been fighting battles since before you were born, Garrett said. I know how to operate when outnumbered and outgunned. I know how to turn weakness into advantage. And I know that doing nothing means Aldrich wins, your true mate dies, and this pack becomes a puppet state for a man who turned 200 wolves into experiments. The two men stared at each other across the table, father and son, suppressed wolf and perfect alpha. Decades of complicated history and fresh wounds, and the urgent pressure of a threat that would not wait for reconciliation.
Marcus nodded once. We move tonight, Elena first, then we figure out the rest.
They left Moira's cottage as the first hint of dawn touched the eastern sky. Warriors split off to their assignments. Marcus headed north toward Elena's cabin with his most trusted fighters, and Garrett stood in the clearing with the list of names in his hand, feeling his wolf settle into his bones with a rightness that made 40 years of believing himself defective feel like a bad dream finally ending. The old woman appeared beside him, silent as smoke. You will need training, she said. Your wolf is powerful but raw, untested. You are running on instinct and adrenaline, but that will not sustain you through what is coming.
Then train me, Garrett said, fast, because I am not letting another person I care about die while I stand helpless.
Moira studied him with those unsettling silver eyes. You understand that breaking the suppression is only the beginning, that the real battle will be psychological. These men have built entire identities around being unable to shift. Convincing them to try again, to risk the hope and potential failure, will be harder than any physical combat. I spent 3 decades convincing young soldiers they could survive situations that logic said would kill them, Garrett replied. I know how to reach men who have given up hope. Good, Moira said, because the first name on your list lives 3 hours north. Former Marine, 62 years old, has not tried to shift since he was 25. and he happens to be Aldrich Silvermane's second-in-command on the Pack Council. Garrett looked at the name. Colonel James McCullister. Iron, they had called him in the service. Garrett remembered the man vaguely from overlapping deployments. Remembered a warrior who fought with the kind of precision that suggested supernatural enhancement, but who had always claimed to be human descended, not wolf-blooded. "This could be a trap," Garrett said. "Everything from here forward could be a trap," Moira agreed. "But that is what makes it interesting." Garrett folded the list and tucked it into his borrowed jacket. His body felt strong despite the night's trauma. His mind felt clear. His wolf felt patient, coiled and ready but not demanding, content to let the human tactical expertise lead. For the first time in 58 years, Colonel Garrett Blackwood felt complete, and he was about to start a war. The drive north took Garrett through territory he had not traveled in decades, past farms where Pack families lived in uneasy proximity to human settlements, past the old military checkpoint that had been decommissioned after the Cold War ended, past memories of a younger version of himself who had believed duty and honor were the same thing, who had trusted the uniform and the flag and the men who gave orders in the name of national security. That young soldier had been a fool. Dawn broke over the mountains as Garrett pulled his truck into the parking lot of a small diner just outside Ridgeway, the kind of place where truckers and early morning workers gathered for coffee and gossip, where a stranger could sit unnoticed if he kept his head down and his questions casual. But Garrett was not here for coffee. He was here because Moira's intelligence said that Colonel James McCullister ate breakfast at this diner every morning at 0600 hours, regular as clockwork, decades of military habit outlasting retirement. The man who walked through the door at precisely 6 a.m. looked every day of his 62 years. Tall and lean, with the kind of weathered toughness that came from surviving too many tours in too many hellholes. Gray hair cut military short, scars visible on his forearms where his rolled-up sleeves exposed skin that had seen combat up close. But it was the eyes that confirmed what Garrett suspected. Sharp, assessing. The eyes of a predator trying to pretend he was prey. Iron McCullister ordered coffee, black, and eggs over easy, same as he probably had every morning for 3 decades. He took a booth near the back with clear sightlines to all exits. Combat veteran habits, the kind that never died no matter how many years passed since the last firefight. Garrett waited until the waitress delivered the coffee, then slid into the booth across from his old comrade. Iron's hand moved toward his waistband, where Garrett knew a concealed weapon rested. But recognition flickered across those hard eyes, followed by confusion, followed by something that might have been hope quickly suppressed. "Blackwood," Iron said, "heard you finally grew a spine, or should I say grew a tail." "News travels fast," Garrett replied. "When a supposedly defective 60-year-old man shifts for the first time and takes down a rogue alpha in single combat, that kind of news spreads like wildfire." Iron sipped his coffee, his expression carefully neutral. "So what brings you to my territory? Social call? Or are you here to tell me I am next on someone's hit list?" "Both, actually." Garrett pulled the Project Silverback file from his jacket and laid it on the table between them. "You remember volunteering for an experimental program in '63, Enhanced Soldier Initiative? Promised you would serve your country in ways beyond normal duty?" Iron's jaw tightened. His hand moved away from his weapon, but his entire body tensed like a wire pulled taut. "I remember thinking I had a wolf and waking up one day realizing it was gone. I remember being told I was defective, genetic flaw, bad breeding, all the comfortable lies they feed men who do not fit the mold." "They were not lies," Garrett said quietly. "They were cover stories. Project Silverback. Chemical suppression combined with psychological conditioning. 200 wolves deliberately broken to create controllable super soldiers. You and I were both subjects. And the man who ran the program now sits on the Pack Council, pulling strings through his daughter who just became Luna to my son." Iron stared at the file without touching it, as if acknowledging its existence would make the implications real in ways he could not take back. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of 4 decades' worth of perceived defect and rage compressed into 3 words. "Prove it, now." Garrett opened the file and turned it so Iron could read. Photographs, chemical formulas, subject rosters with their names highlighted. McCullister, James, subject 43, status 89% suppression achieved, suitable for black operations deployment, medical records showing the procedures,
psychological evaluations documenting the conditioning, financial records proving the program continued long after it should have been shut down. Iron read in silence. His coffee grew cold. His breakfast sat untouched. His knuckles went white where he gripped the edge of the table. When he reached the end of the documents, he carefully closed the file and looked up at Garrett with eyes that burned. "How long have you known?" "Since last night. Found out about 3 hours after I shifted. An elder named Moira has been tracking this for decades, kept the files hidden, waiting for someone to break free so she could prove what was done to us." "And you broke free because?" Garrett considered how much to share, decided that half-truths would not serve here. "My wife was killed by rogues 10 years ago. I could not protect her. That trauma weakened the conditioning. Last night I faced another rogue attack, felt that same helplessness, and something inside me just shattered. The suppression broke. My wolf came back." Iron nodded slowly. His fingers drummed on the table, a nervous habit Garrett remembered from the service. Always drumming, always needing to move even when staying still was tactically smarter. "That means it can break," he said. "The suppression. If you broke free, others can too." "That is the theory, which is why I am here. I need warriors who understand tactics and strategy. Men who have fought real battles, not just territory skirmishes. Wolves who can think like soldiers and fight like alphas." Garrett leaned forward. "Aldrich Silvermane ran Project Silverback. He controls half the council through blackmail and manipulation. He just secured an alliance with my son through a political marriage, and he is planning to eliminate the evidence of what he did, starting with anyone who breaks free from the suppression." "You think he will come after you?" "I know he will. And he will come after my son's true mate because she is carrying a child that threatens his carefully constructed lies. And eventually he will come after every other survivor on this list." Garrett tapped the file. "Unless we move first, unless we wake the others, unless we build a force strong enough to expose what was done and take down the man who did it." Iron was quiet for a long moment. His jaw worked, his eyes distant, looking at something Garrett could not see. Memories, perhaps, or calculations, or the careful architecture of a life built on lies suddenly revealed for what it was. "I work for Aldrich," Iron said finally. "Second in command on the council. Have been for 15 years. You know this, yes? You know that coming here could be walking into a trap?" "I know," Garrett said. "But I also know that you were the best tactical operator I ever served with. And I know that if you truly believed you were defective, if you had accepted that burden, you would not have stayed close to pack politics. You would have done what I did, retreated to the boundaries, lived alone, given up. The fact that you stayed, that you worked your way into a position of influence despite being supposedly unable to shift, tells me you never quite believed the lie. Tells me some part of you always knew something was wrong." Iron's expression did not change, but Garrett saw the truth in the minute tightening around his eyes, the slight shift in breathing, the way his shoulders came down just a fraction. Recognition, validation, the relief of a man who had carried a weight for 40 years, finally being told he could set it down. 15 years, Iron said quietly, almost to himself. 15 years I have worked for that man, followed his orders, implemented his policies, helped him place suppressed wolves in positions where he could control them. I thought I was serving the pack, thought I was doing good work despite my limitations. He looked up at Garrett, and there was something raw in his expression now, something vulnerable that soldiers learned never to show. "I knew," he said, not consciously, not in any way I could articulate, but I knew something was wrong, felt it every time Aldrich gave me an assignment, every time he looked at me with that expression of satisfaction, like I was a tool performing exactly as designed. I told myself I was imagining it, told myself I was paranoid, told myself I should be grateful for the opportunity he gave a defective wolf. He pushed his untouched breakfast away. "What do you need from me?" "Try to shift," Garrett said simply. "Right now. Here. See if you can break through whatever they did to us. Because if you can, if the suppression can be overcome through will and knowledge and understanding what was done, then we have a chance. If you cannot, then I am fighting this alone, and my odds drop considerably. You are asking me to risk 40 years of identity on the chance that a conspiracy theory might be true, and my wolf might still exist. You understand how that sounds?" "I do. But I also understand what it felt like last night when my wolf finally emerged, when I finally felt complete, when 58 years of believing myself defective burned away in seconds, and I realized I had been lied to my entire adult life. Garrett held Iron's gaze. I cannot promise it will work, but I can promise that if you do not try, you will spend the rest of your life wondering. And I can promise that Aldrich will eventually tie up loose ends. Men like him always do. Iron stood, threw cash on the table to cover his meal and Garrett's coffee. Outside, now. If this goes wrong, I do not want witnesses. They walked behind the diner to a maintenance area where dumpsters and delivery trucks created a natural privacy screen. The sun had fully risen now, turning the sky brilliant with morning light. Birds sang in the trees. Traffic hummed on the nearby highway, normal sounds of a normal day, except nothing about this was normal. Iron closed his eyes. His breathing slowed. Garrett watched tactical assessment shift to internal focus, watched a warrior who had survived 3 wars and 40 years of perceived defect reach down into places he had not touched in decades. Nothing happened. Iron tried again. Muscles tensing, jaw clenching, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. His hands formed fists so tight the knuckles went white, but no shift came, no transformation, no wolf. "It is not there," Iron said finally, his voice rough. "Whatever you broke through, I cannot find it. Maybe your suppression was different. Maybe the trauma you experienced was enough to crack it, but mine is not. Maybe I really am just defective, and you are the exception. Or maybe you are trying too hard," Garrett said. "When I shifted, it was not because I was trying to force my wolf out. It was because I stopped caring about control, stopped trying to be the perfect soldier who followed orders and accepted what authority figures told him. I just let myself feel the rage, the helplessness, the absolute refusal to be powerless ever again." Iron opened his eyes. "You want me to have an emotional breakdown in a dumpster area behind a roadside diner. I want you to stop pretending you accepted what they did to us. Stop acting like you are fine with being defective. Stop holding on to control because control is all you have left." Garrett stepped closer. "You are 62 years old, decorated war hero, survived things that would break lesser men, and you have spent 40 years thinking you were defective because some government program told you so. 15 of those years serving the man who did it to you. Are you going to let them win? Are you going to die without ever knowing if your wolf was really gone or just sleeping?" The words hit like physical blows. Garrett saw it in the way Iron flinched, in the way his careful control cracked around the edges, in the way 4 decades of suppressed rage and perceived inadequacy and desperate hope came flooding to the surface. "I should have been able to shift," Iron said, and his voice shook. "I came from good bloodlines, strong alphas on both sides. My father could shift. My grandfather could shift. But me? Nothing. Just human weakness pretending to be wolf strength. Do you know what that does to a man? To know he is defective in ways that matter? To spend every day proving he is worth something despite being fundamentally flawed?" "You are not flawed," Garrett said. "You were deliberately sabotaged by men who feared what you could become, by a man you have been serving for 15 years, by a man who looked at you every day knowing exactly what he had stolen from you." Iron's breathing changed, became ragged. His hands shook. His eyes, those hard combat veteran eyes that had seen too much death and dealt too much violence, suddenly looked lost, vulnerable, human in ways that soldiers learned never to show. 15 years, Iron whispered. "I could have been free, could have known. And instead, I was his loyal dog, his perfect tool, his proof that suppressed wolves could be controlled and useful." The rage when it came was not explosive. It was cold, controlled, the kind of fury that came from a lifetime of discipline channeling into a single point of absolute refusal. No more. The shift that took Iron McCullister was nothing like Garrett's violent emergence. It was slow, deliberate, like watching a man dismantle a prison brick by brick with nothing but willpower and the absolute certainty that freedom mattered more than the pain of achieving it. His body tried to transform, and the suppression fought back. Chemical barriers, psychological conditioning, 40 years of programming screaming that this was wrong, impossible, forbidden. But Iron McCullister had survived 3 tours in hell, had walked through jungles where death waited behind every tree, had led men into firefights where coming home was never guaranteed. He knew how to push through pain, knew how to find reserves when logic said there was nothing left, knew that some battles were won not through strength, but through the sheer, stubborn refusal to quit. His wolf emerged like a soldier coming home from war, battered, scarred, older than it should be, but present, real, undeniably there. The gray wolf that stood where Iron had been was smaller than Garrett's black beast, but no less dangerous, lean and efficient, built for endurance rather than raw power. The kind of predator that won through patience and precision rather than overwhelming force. His eyes, still sharp and assessing even in wolf form, met Garrett's with an expression that mixed triumph and grief and rage. They stayed like that for several minutes, two wolves behind a diner in the early morning light, both experiencing completeness for the first time in decades. Then Iron shifted back to human form with the same slow difficulty that had marked his transformation. He collapsed to his hands and knees, breathing hard, naked, and shaking. Garrett pulled off his jacket and tossed it to the other man, gave him time to recover, to process, to integrate what had just happened into a worldview that had been built on a foundation of lies. When Iron finally spoke, his voice was steady despite everything. How many others are on that list? 53 with military backgrounds, another 130 scattered in various positions of influence, all of them thinking they are defective. All of them potentially powerful allies if we can wake them up. Then we have work to do. Iron stood, wrapped the jacket around himself with as much dignity as a naked man could manage. But first we need to secure your son's mate, because you are right. Aldrich will move against her immediately, and if she dies carrying that child, we lose our best proof that something is fundamentally wrong with the current power structure. You will help, even though it means turning against your employer? Iron's smile was cold. Aldrich Silvermane stole 40 years of my life, made me think I was defective, used me as a tool while knowing exactly what he had done to create my weakness. Oh, I will help. And when this is finished, when we have exposed every crime and freed every suppressed wolf, I am going to make very sure he understands exactly what it costs to turn warriors into experiments. They retrieved clothes from Iron's truck, made plans with the efficiency of men who had coordinated operations in combat zones. By the time they pulled back onto the highway heading south toward Pack territory, they had a strategy. Rough, incomplete, based more on improvisation than solid intelligence. But it was something. It was more than Garrett had when he started this morning. His phone rang as they crossed into Packlands. Marcus. His son's voice was tight with controlled panic. Dad, we have a problem. Elena's cabin is empty. No signs of struggle, but she is gone. Just vanished sometime in the last 3 hours. Garrett's wolf surged forward, protective instincts flaring. Did you track her scent? Ends at the road. She either left voluntarily in a vehicle or someone took her. Marcus paused. There is blood. Not much. Could be from a medical issue. She is 9 months pregnant now. But Dad, if Aldrich has her. He does, Iron said from the driver's seat, loud enough for Marcus to hear through the phone. And I know where he would take her. There is a facility, old military installation that was supposedly decommissioned in the 80s. Aldrich maintained it off the books, uses it for things the council cannot officially know about. If he has your mate, that is where she will be. How do you know this? Marcus demanded. Because I have been his second in command for 15 years, Iron replied. And I just found out everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. So right now you have a choice, Alpha. You can waste time questioning my motives and my loyalty. Or you can trust that your father and I have a common enemy, and we are running out of time to save the woman carrying your child. Garrett heard his sons breathing over the phone, heard the Alpha training warring with the desperate need to act, heard fear bleeding through carefully maintained control. Where is this facility? Marcus asked. 30 miles northeast, built into the mountainside, designed to be defensible. Garrett could hear his son thinking, calculating, planning. How many hostiles? If Aldrich is moving openly, Iron said, he will have at least 20 loyal wolves, maybe more, plus whatever human contractors he still has on payroll. Figure 30 to 40 combatants total, most with military training, all positioned in a facility designed specifically for defense against superior numbers. We have 15 warriors I trust completely, Marcus said, against 40 in a fortified position. Those are terrible odds. Then we even them, Garrett said. Iron and I will hit them from an unexpected angle while you come in the front. Classic pincer movement. Divide their attention. Create chaos. In the confusion, we extract Elena and get out. You just shifted for the first time last night, Marcus protested. You barely know how to control your wolf. This is not a training exercise. This is a tactical assault on a hardened position against experienced combatants who will kill you without hesitation. Son, Garrett said, and his voice carried decades of combat authority. I led men through situations with worse odds than this and brought them home alive. I know what I'm doing. Trust me. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched. Then Marcus said quietly, "Meet me at the North Ridge Overlook. 1 hour. We plan this properly, or we do not go at all." They met at a clearing that overlooked the valley where the facility sat hidden among rocky terrain and thick forest. Marcus arrived with his 15 trusted warriors, all of them geared up and ready for combat. Garrett took in his son's tactical preparations with approval. Weapons, medical supplies, communications equipment, everything a professional operation required. Marcus spread a map on the hood of his truck. The facility is here. Iron, you are going to walk us through the layout and the defensive positions. Iron did, with the clinical precision of a man who had been inside recently and knew every detail. Guard rotations, surveillance coverage, weak points in the perimeter, internal structure, where prisoners would likely be held, where Aldrich would position himself if he was personally overseeing this operation. He will be there, Iron said. This is too important, too risky. He needs to make sure Elena is eliminated in a way that cannot be traced back to him, which means he will want to supervise personally. Then we capture him, Garrett said firmly. We need him alive to testify about Project Silverback. Need him to expose the full conspiracy. If we kill him, he becomes a martyr and his co-conspirators go underground. We need him broken and talking. Marcus looked at his father. You understand that he will not surrender. Men like Aldrich do not go quietly. Taking him alive means risking our own casualties. I understand. But some things matter more than tactical efficiency. We do this right or we do not do it at all. They planned for another 30 minutes, dividing forces, assigning objectives, establishing fallback positions, and extraction routes. It felt familiar, comfortable in ways that surprised Garrett. Father and son working together with the easy coordination of men who understood combat on a fundamental level. The tension from their earlier confrontation did not disappear, but it transformed into something more productive, mutual respect built on competence rather than obligation. When they were ready, when every warrior knew their role and the risks involved, Marcus pulled his father aside. If this goes wrong, he said, if something happens to me, promise you will get Elena out. Promise you will protect my child. Nothing is going to happen to you, Garrett said. Promise me anyway. Garrett looked at his son, saw the fear beneath the alpha control, saw a man facing the consequences of choices made in the name of duty, discovering that duty meant nothing if the people you loved died because of it. Saw himself 30 years ago, standing over Sarah's grave, understanding too late what he should have prioritized. I promise, Garrett said, but you are going to survive this. You are going to claim your mate properly. You are going to raise your child. And you are going to learn from my mistakes instead of repeating them. Marcus nodded. Then let us go to war. The approach to the facility was slow and careful. Marcus's main force moved openly along the access road, drawing attention, triggering alarms exactly as planned. While guards mobilized to meet that threat, Garrett and Iron circled wide with 3 of Marcus's best stealth operators. They came in from the blind side, the angle Iron knew had minimal surveillance coverage. Getting past the outer perimeter took 20 minutes of patient infiltration, disabling cameras, avoiding patrol routes, moving with the kind of silence that only came from decades of practice. Garrett's newly awakened wolf helped, enhancing his senses, letting him smell guards before seeing them, letting him move with a grace his human form had never possessed. They breached the facility through a maintenance access that Iron remembered from his time as Aldrich's second. The interior was exactly as described. Concrete corridors, reinforced doors, the sterile functionality of military design unchanged since the Cold War. Garrett could hear combat erupting at the main entrance, Marcus's wolves engaging Aldrich's forces, gunfire, snarls, the chaotic symphony of supernatural creatures fighting with both tooth and technology. The distraction was working. They moved deeper into the facility, took down 2 guards with silent efficiency, found the detention level where Iron said prisoners would be held, and there, behind a door marked with warnings about medical biohazards, they found her. Elena was conscious, but barely, strapped to an examination table, 9 months pregnant and hooked to medical equipment that monitored vital signs. A Dr. Garrett did not recognize stood beside her with a syringe, preparing to inject something into her IV line. Garrett's wolf surged forward with protective rage. He shifted without conscious thought, the transformation smoother now, more controlled. His black wolf form erupted into the room like a force of nature. The doctor dropped the syringe and ran for an alarm. Iron, still in human form with a gun drawn, shot the man in the leg. Non-lethal, but effective at stopping his escape. Elena's eyes focused on Garrett. Recognition flickered despite her drugged state. "Marcus's father," she whispered. "You shifted. Finally." "We are getting you out of here," Garrett said, then realized he was trying to speak in wolf form, and it came out as incomprehensible sounds. He shifted back to human, painfully aware of his nakedness but not caring. One of the stealth operators handed him pants and a shirt. "Can you walk?" Elena tried to sit up and gasped in pain. Her hands went to her swollen belly. "Something is wrong. They gave me something. Said it would terminate the pregnancy without leaving evidence. Make it look like natural complications." The rage that filled Garrett was cold and calculating. "How long ago?" 5 minutes, maybe less. "I tried to fight, but I could not. Her wolf has not emerged yet. Cannot protect the baby the way a shifted mother could. I am so sorry. I could not." "You are going to be fine," Garrett said with more confidence than he felt. "Both of you. But we need to move. Now." Iron was already checking the medical equipment, reading labels on medication bottles with a warrior's practical efficiency. "This is a synthetic poison, designed to trigger premature labor and fetal distress. But it is slow-acting. We have maybe 30 minutes before it becomes irreversible. We need a medical facility. Real doctors, not field medicine." "Then we get her to a hospital," Garrett said. "Clear the route. I will carry her." "You cannot carry a pregnant woman and fight," one of the operators protested. "Watch me." They emerged from the detention level into chaos. Marcus's assault had pushed deeper into the facility than planned. Combat had spread from the main entrance through the corridors, turning the enclosed space into a nightmare of close-quarters fighting. Garrett moved through it with Elena cradled in his arms, his wolf instincts guiding him through danger, his combat experience letting him predict threats before they materialized. Iron and the operators formed a protective screen, taking down enemies with the brutal efficiency of men fighting for something that mattered. Not glory, not territory, but the simple moral clarity of protecting an innocent woman and her unborn child from men who had decided they were inconvenient. They were nearly to the exit when Aldrich Silvermane stepped into their path. The man who had run Project Silverback looked exactly like he did in his photograph from 40 years ago. Older now, his hair gray and his face lined, but carrying himself with the same arrogant certainty. He was flanked by 6 wolves in combat form, his personal guard, the most loyal and most dangerous of his followers. "Colonel Blackwood," Aldrich said, his voice conversational despite the violence echoing through the facility. "I must say I am impressed. 58 years suppressed and you break free in less than 24 hours. Then you turn my own second-in-command against me and assault my facility with a scratch force. You always were a better tactical thinker than your psychological profile suggested." "You stole 40 years of my life," Garrett said. "Made me think I was defective. Used that perception to control me, to control all of us." "I gave you 40 years of service to your country," Aldrich corrected. "Made you into the perfect soldier, disciplined, dedicated, unburdened by the volatile instincts that make natural wolves so difficult to command. You should be thanking me." "Thank you?" Garrett felt his wolf pushing forward, demanding release, demanding violence. "You want thanks for turning men into experiments?" "I want recognition for solving a problem," Aldrich replied. "Werewolves are powerful but unreliable, driven by territory and pack bonds and mate instincts that override rational thought. But suppress the wolf, keep the enhanced abilities, add military training, and you create something better. Something controllable. Something that serves without question." "We were not serving," Iron said, his weapon trained on Aldrich. "We were slaves, tools, things you used and discarded." "You were soldiers," Aldrich said, "following orders, completing missions, doing what warriors have always done. The only difference is I made sure your personal desires did not interfere with mission success. The woman in my arms is dying because of you," Garrett said. "She did nothing except have the misfortune of being my son's true mate, of carrying a child that might expose your lies. and you decided she was expendable. She is a complication, Aldrich said simply, one among many. Just like you are a complication now, just like every other suppressed wolf who might break free and start asking questions. I built a system that works, that keeps our kind hidden and safe and organized. I will not let that system fail because some allegedly defective wolves decided they want to reclaim what I rightfully took. The 6 wolves in combat formed tensed, ready to attack on their master's command. Garrett did the calculations. He was carrying Elena, could not fight effectively while protecting her. Iron and the operators were outnumbered, and these were elite guards. The odds of fighting through were poor. The odds of getting Elena out alive were worse. Then Marcus crashed through the wall. Not through a door, through the actual wall. His alpha wolf form, larger than any other in the facility, hit the concrete with enough force to shatter reinforced material. He came through in a shower of debris and dust, his territorial rage making the air itself feel heavy. Behind him, his 15 warriors flooded the breach, having fought their way through Aldrich's entire defensive force to reach this moment. The numerical advantage shifted instantly. Aldrich's expression flickered, just for a moment. Just long enough to show that beneath the arrogant certainty, he understood his position had become untenable. He was an old man who had relied on manipulation and proxy power for decades. Now he faced an alpha wolf in the prime of his strength, backed by warriors loyal unto death, fighting for something that could not be bought or controlled or suppressed. "Stand down," Marcus said, his voice carrying alpha command that made even Garrett's independent wolf want to submit. "You have lost. Your facility is taken. Your guards are defeated or fleeing. You have nothing left except the choice of how this ends." "I have half the council," Aldrich said. "I have decades of embedded influence. I have resources and connections you cannot begin to understand. Killing me changes nothing. The system I built will continue without me." "Then we will dismantle it piece by piece," Marcus replied. "Starting with you testifying about every crime, every wolf you suppressed, every life you destroyed. You are going to burn down everything you built, and you are going to do it publicly. I will never cooperate." "Then you will rot in a cell while we do it without you," Garrett said. "Either way, Project Silverback ends today. Either way, the truth comes out. The only variable is whether you retain any shred of dignity in the process." Aldrich looked at the wolves surrounding him, at Marcus radiating alpha power, at Garrett holding Elena like she was precious cargo worth dying for, at Iron, his former second-in-command, aiming a gun at his head with the steady hand of a professional who would not miss, at the tactical reality that no amount of political maneuvering could overcome. He did something Garrett did not expect. He surrendered, not with words, with the gesture, a lowering of his eyes, a step backward, the universal wolf signal of submission. His 6 guards, reading their master's cue, shifted back to human form and raised their hands. The fight drained out of the room as quickly as it had built. Marcus's warriors moved in to secure the prisoners. Garrett turned to his son. "We need a hospital, now. The poison they gave Elena is slow-acting, but we are running out of time." "My truck is outside," Marcus said. "Medical team is standing by." "But Dad," he hesitated. "Can she make it 30 minutes? "We are about to find out." The drive to the nearest pack hospital was the longest 30 minutes of Garrett's life. Elena faded in and out of consciousness. Her vital signs deteriorated despite the field medic's efforts. The baby's heartbeat became irregular. Medical terminology Garrett did not fully understand flew between the warriors with medical training, all of it sounding increasingly desperate. But they made it, barely. The emergency team was ready when they pulled up to the facility. They rushed Elena into surgery while Garrett stood in the hallway, covered in blood and dirt and the evidence of combat, feeling more helpless than he had during any firefight. Marcus stood beside him. Neither man spoke. What was there to say? That they had saved her, but might still lose her? That sometimes winning the battle was not enough? That being powerful and tactical and absolutely right did not guarantee the outcome you needed? Iron appeared with coffee, handed cups to both of them, sat down on the floor with his back against the wall like they were back in the service waiting for extraction after a mission gone wrong. "She is strong," Iron said, "and the baby has good bloodlines. They will fight." "How do you know?" Marcus asked. "Because I have seen too many people die and too many people survive to believe that will, And genetics do not matter, Iron replied. Your mate chose to survive long enough for rescue. Your child chose to hang on despite being poisoned. They are fighters. Honor that by having faith. 2 hours later, a doctor emerged from surgery, exhausted but smiling. The baby is fine, she said. We delivered him 5 weeks early, but he is breathing on his own and his vitals are strong. The mother is stable. The poison was neutralized in time. They are going to recover. Garrett felt his knees go weak, felt relief so intense it was almost painful, felt his wolf settle in his chest with satisfaction, felt, for the first time since Sarah died, like maybe the universe occasionally delivered justice. Marcus pushed past the doctor and disappeared into the recovery room. The doctor looked at Garrett. You must be the grandfather, she said. You have a strong grandson, Colonel. He has not shifted yet, but his wolf is present. We can sense it. Very powerful for a newborn, and very, very determined. Garrett nodded, unable to speak, unable to process, unable to do anything except stand there and feel the weight of too many emotions compressed into a moment that should have been simple joy, but carried the complexity of everything that had led to this point. Iron clapped him on the shoulder. You did good today, old friend. Saved the girl, saved the baby, exposed the conspiracy. Not bad for your second day with a wolf. Today is not over yet, Garrett said. We still have Aldrich in custody, still have a council to confront, still have 180 suppressed wolves who need to know the truth. The war is just beginning. Then we better get started, Iron said, because I am 62 years old and I have 40 years of anger to work through. Would hate to die before finishing what we started. They left Marcus with his mate and child, drove back to Pack territory with Aldrich in custody and evidence that would shatter the comfortable lies the council had built their power upon. The facility had yielded files, proof of financial crimes, testimony from guards willing to cooperate rather than face charges as accessories. By the time the sun set on Garrett's second day with his wolf, the truth was spreading through the Pack territories like wildfire. Project Silverback, 200 wolves suppressed, decades of manipulation, the systematic destruction of men who should have been honored as warriors but were instead treated as experiments. The council called an emergency session. 7 packs assembled. Everyone demanded answers. And Garrett Blackwood, newly awakened at 58, stood before them with his son beside him and his oldest friend at his back, ready to burn down everything that had been built on lies and replace it with something better. Ready to give 200 men their lives back. Ready for whatever came next. The Great Hall had never been designed to hold this much anger. 7 allied packs crowded into a space meant for ceremony and celebration, their collective rage making the ancient stone walls feel too thin, too fragile to contain what was building. Garrett stood near the center of it all, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes on him. Some looked at him with hope, others with suspicion. Most with the desperate need for answers to questions they had been carrying for decades. The council sat in their traditional positions on the raised platform, but their authority had crumbled like sand castles before a tide. 3 of the 7 members wore expressions of genuine shock as they processed the evidence that had been presented. 2 looked furious at being deceived. 1 appeared to be calculating how to distance himself from the scandal before it destroyed him completely. And Aldrich Silvermane sat in chains at the center of the platform, flanked by guards, his arrogant certainty finally stripped away to reveal an old man facing consequences he had thought himself immune to. Marcus stood beside his father, his alpha presence anchoring the chaos, keeping the assembled wolves from descending into violence. Elena was still recovering in the hospital, their newborn son under guard in the medical facility. Victoria had disappeared the moment news broke, fleeing to her family's remaining territory with whatever dignity she could salvage. The political marriage that was supposed to cement Aldrich's power had dissolved in less than 48 hours. The head counselor, an ancient wolf named Thorsten who had served for 3 decades, finally called for order. His voice carried the weight of age and exhaustion. "Colonel Blackwood," he said, "you have made serious accusations, provided extensive documentation, brought forward witnesses and evidence that suggest a conspiracy spanning 40 years. The council has reviewed your materials. We have questions." "Ask them," Garrett replied. His voice was steady despite the fatigue that made his bones ache. He had not slept in 2 days, had shifted forms a dozen times as his body learned to navigate the transformation. had fought battles and made decisions that would reshape pack society. But he was a soldier. Soldiers endured. How many wolves were affected by this Project Silverback? Thorsten asked. 200 initially, Garrett said. 20 died during the suppression process. The remaining 180 are still alive, scattered across the country. Most in their 50s and 60s now, living with the belief they are defective, not knowing they were deliberately broken. A murmur ran through the assembled packs. 180 wolves, an entire generation of warriors believing themselves flawed. The implications were staggering. And you can prove this was deliberate? That it was not simply medical treatment that went wrong? Garrett gestured to Iron, who stepped forward with a file box. The former second-in-command to Aldrich had spent the last 24 hours compiling evidence with the methodical precision of a man building a prosecution case. Financial records, Iron said, spreading documents across a table visible to the entire assembly. Government funding for Project Silverback. Payments made to Aldrich Silvermane and his research team. Continued funding through shell corporations even after the official program was shut down in 1972. Medical records showing the chemical compounds used, psychological evaluations documenting the conditioning process, and testimony from 12 guards and medical personnel willing to corroborate every detail in exchange for immunity. He pulled out another stack of papers. Subject files, all 200, including detailed notes on suppression success rates, behavioral changes, and long-term monitoring. Aldrich kept meticulous records, probably because he was proud of what he had accomplished, because he genuinely believed he was serving the greater good by turning volatile wolves into controllable soldiers. All eyes turned to Aldrich. The old man met their stares without flinching, his expression one of weary defiance. "I did serve the greater good," he said. His voice carried the absolute certainty of a man who had never questioned his own righteousness. Werewolves are powerful, but unstable. Our instincts make us violent. Our territorial nature makes us fractious. Our mate bonds make us vulnerable to emotional manipulation. I created a program that eliminated those weaknesses, made us better, made us capable of serving in modern military operations without the liability of supernatural volatility. "You made us into tools," a voice called from the crowd. Garrett turned to see a wolf he recognized from the subject list. Henry Thornton, former Army Ranger, 60 years old and visibly shaking with rage. "You took my wolf when I was 22, made me think I was defective for 38 years. Do you have any idea what that does to a man? What it costs to live every day thinking you are fundamentally flawed?" Other voices joined his, wolves stepping forward from the crowd. Some Garrett recognized from the files. Others must have broken free from suppression in the chaos of the last 2 days, drawn by the rumors spreading through pack territories. Each had a story. Each had decades of perceived inadequacy. Each had been robbed of something fundamental to their identity. Aldrich listened to them all with the expression of a scientist observing experimental results. No remorse. No understanding that what he had done was anything other than logical problem-solving. When the testimonies finally subsided, he spoke again. "You all volunteered," he said. "You all signed consent forms. You all agreed to experimental enhancement programs in service to your country. The fact that you were too naive to understand the implications does not make me a villain. It makes you willing participants who simply did not read the fine print." The hall erupted in shouts. Garrett saw several wolves shifting, their control slipping as rage overwhelmed reason. Marcus moved to the front, his alpha command radiating outward in waves that forced everyone back into human form. "Enough," Marcus said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the chaos like a blade. "We are not animals. We do not descend into mob violence. We have laws. We have procedures. We will follow them." Thorsten nodded. "The council agrees. Aldrich Silvermane will stand trial for his crimes, a formal proceeding with evidence and testimony and proper legal structure. Those who were affected by Project Silverback will have the opportunity to speak. Justice will be served." "And what about the others?" Garrett asked. "The 180 wolves who still believe they are defective? Who are still living under suppression? Do we have a plan to reach them? To offer them the chance to break free?" Thorsten hesitated. "That is a more complex question. Many of those wolves have built lives around their perceived limitation. They have families who know them as unable to shift. They hold positions in human society where suddenly developing supernatural abilities would raise dangerous questions. Contacting them, trying to convince them to attempt shifting again, could expose our entire society. So we leave them imprisoned? Iron demanded. We let them continue suffering because it is more convenient than risking exposure? We proceed carefully, Thorsten replied. We contact them discreetly. We offer them information and the choice to act on it. But we cannot force awakening on men who may not want it. Some may prefer the lives they have built. Some may fear the change more than they value the completeness. Garrett understood this political calculation, even as it made his wolf snarl with frustration. The council was trying to contain a scandal that could shatter pack society, trying to manage a crisis that had no good solutions, trying to balance justice for the victims against stability for everyone else. But he was not a politician. He was a soldier who had learned too late that some things mattered more than tactical efficiency. I will contact them, Garrett said. Every single one. I will tell them the truth. I will offer them the evidence and the choice. And I will help any who want to break free from what was done to them. You can support me or oppose me. But I am doing this regardless of what the council decides. Thorsten studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. The council will support your efforts, with resources and protection, on one condition. You do this quietly. You do not expose our society to human scrutiny. You do not create a media circus that forces governmental attention. Discretion in exchange for our full backing. Agreed, Garrett said. Then he looked at Marcus. I am going to need help. This is not a one-man operation. This is a campaign that could take months, years even. I need warriors who understand tactics. I need wolves who can be trusted with secrets. And I need an alpha willing to stand behind this even when it becomes politically difficult. You have me, Marcus said without hesitation. And you have Iron. And you have every wolf in this hall who was affected by Aldrich's crimes. We stand together on this. The vote was unanimous. Project Silverback's victims would be contacted, offered truth and choice, given the chance to reclaim what had been stolen. It was not perfect justice. It would not erase 40 years of suffering. But it was something. It was more than any of them had yesterday. The trial of Aldrich Silvermane took 3 weeks to prepare and 2 days to complete. Garrett sat through every minute of testimony, watching as witness after witness described what had been done to them. The perceived inadequacy they had carried. The lives half-lived because they thought themselves flawed. The opportunities lost, and relationships damaged, and self-worth destroyed by a lie that had been carefully constructed and maintained for decades. Aldrich offered no defense except to repeat that he had been serving the greater good, that he had made hard choices in service to a vision of what wolves could become, that history would vindicate him even if the present condemned him. The council found him guilty on 47 counts. The sentence was life imprisonment in a maximum security facility designed to hold supernatural offenders. No possibility of parole, no chance of political maneuvering buying his freedom. He would die in a cell, his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale about the dangers of believing that ends justified means. Victoria came forward during the sentencing phase. She stood before the council, visibly pregnant, her dignity in tatters, but her voice steady. I did not know, she said. I swear on my unborn child that I did not know what my father had done. I thought the marriage to Marcus was genuine political alliance. I thought I was serving my pack and my family. When I learned the truth, when I understood that my entire life had been arranged by a man conducting experiments, I felt betrayed in ways I cannot articulate. She turned to Marcus, who sat in the gallery beside Elena. His mate was still recovering, but had insisted on attending the trial. Their son was with trusted guards, healthy and strong despite his premature arrival. I release you from our bond, Victoria said, formally and publicly. I want no claim on you or your pack or your future. My father's crimes are not mine, but I will carry the weight of association for the rest of my life. The only thing I ask is that my child be allowed to know their heritage, that when they are old enough to understand, they are told the truth about their grandfather and given the choice of whether to claim pack membership. Marcus stood, walked to where Victoria stood before the council. For a moment, Garrett thought his son might reject her entirely, might choose cruelty as payback for the deception. But Marcus had learned something in the crucible of the last few weeks, had learned what his father tried to teach him through example rather than words. Your child is innocent, Marcus said. They will be welcomed in pack territory. They will know their heritage and their choices. And you, Victoria, are not responsible for your father's sins. You will have our protection and our support as you rebuild your life. This I promise as Alpha." The grace of it made Garrett's chest tight, made him proud in ways he had not felt since Marcus took his first shift 2 decades ago. His son was learning, growing, becoming the kind of leader who understood that strength included mercy. The work began immediately. Garrett and Iron developed a system for contacting Project Silverback's victims. They identified wolves from the subject list, researched their current situations, approached them carefully with evidence and explanations, offered them the choice to try breaking their suppression with full support and medical monitoring. The responses varied wildly. Some broke down crying when they learned the truth. These wolves attempted shifting immediately, desperate to reclaim what had been stolen. Most succeeded with help. A few failed despite multiple attempts, the suppression too deeply rooted or their psychological barriers too strong. But even those who could not shift seemed lighter after learning they had not been born defective. Others reacted with denial, insisted the evidence was fabricated. These wolves wanted nothing to do with Garrett's campaign, wanted to be left alone in the lives they had built. Garrett respected those choices even as they pained him. Freedom meant the right to refuse awakening as much as the right to pursue it. And some reacted with violence. Wolves who had built their entire identities around their perceived flaw, who had turned it into weapons, who could not psychologically handle having that foundation destroyed. These were the dangerous ones. Garrett collected scars from these encounters, learned that offering truth sometimes invited attack from those who preferred comfortable lies. But slowly, steadily, the network of awakened wolves grew. 30 broke free in the first month, 50 by the end of 3 months. Each success made the next easier, as wolves who had shifted helped others through the process. Each awakening added another voice, demanding accountability, demanding change, demanding that the systems built on lies be torn down and replaced with something honest. 6 months after his first shift, Garrett stood in a training ground watching 24 newly awakened wolves learning to control their transformations. They ranged in age from 55 to 70, all combat veterans, all men who had survived wars and carried perceived inadequacy, and now were reclaiming power that should never have been taken. Iron ran them through drills with the efficiency of a man who had spent 40 years waiting for this moment. Shift and hold, shift and move, shift and fight. The basics that every young wolf learned naturally, but these older warriors had to study like a new language. They struggled. They failed. They got back up and tried again with the stubbornness of men who had survived too much to quit now. Marcus approached, his infant son cradled in his arms. The baby was 6 months old now, healthy and alert. Elena walked beside her mate, recovered from her ordeal, and formally claimed as Luna in a ceremony that had felt more genuine than any political coronation. "Your grandson is strong," Marcus said, offering the baby to Garrett. "He has not shifted yet, but the healers say his wolf is present. Very powerful. He will likely shift early." Garrett took the child carefully, felt the small weight settle against his chest, looked down at gold-flecked eyes that watched him with unsettling awareness for an infant. This was legacy. This was future. This was everything they had been fighting for distilled into one tiny life that would never know the burden of believing himself defective. "What are you going to name him?" Garrett asked. "You have been calling him baby for 6 months. He needs something more permanent." Marcus glanced at Elena, who nodded. "We decided on Garrett Marcus Stoneheart, after the 2 men who taught him what honor actually means, if that is acceptable to you." Garrett felt his throat tighten, felt emotions that a lifetime of military discipline had taught him to suppress suddenly overwhelming his carefully maintained control. He looked at his son, at his grandson, at the mate who had been worth fighting for, and the life being built on truth instead of political convenience. "It is acceptable," he managed. "It is an honor." They stood together watching the training session. 3 generations of wolves, past and present and future. The baby shifted suddenly in Garrett's arms, his small wolf form no bigger than a puppy, and made soft sounds of contentment before shifting back. Moira appeared at the edge of the training ground as she often did, materializing from the forest with the timing that suggested she had been waiting for this exact moment. Garrett handed his grandson back to Marcus and walked to meet the old woman. "You have done well," she said without preamble. 68 awakened in 6 months, Aldrich imprisoned. The council destabilized in productive ways. Pack society questioning foundations that needed to be questioned. "Why do I sense a butt coming?" Garrett asked. "Because there is more work to be done," Moira replied. The wolves who were not part of Project Silverback, but who were affected by parallel programs in other countries. Russia had a similar initiative. China, England, France. All of them experimenting on their own wolves, trying to create controllable super soldiers, all of them producing men and women who believe they are defective when they were deliberately sabotaged. How many? Conservatively? 2,000 worldwide. She let the number settle. All of them living with the same perceived flaw you carried. All of them deserving the same chance you gave your people. Garrett stared at her. 2,000. The scope of it was overwhelming. What you are describing would take decades, would require international coordination, would expose our entire society to scrutiny we have avoided for centuries. So was shifting at 58, Moira replied. So was awakening 68 suppressed wolves in 6 months. You keep doing impossible things, Colonel. The question is whether you want to expand the mission or pass it to the next generation. Garrett looked back at the training ground, at Marcus with his son, at Iron drilling the newly awakened wolves, at the foundation they had built in 6 months. At 59 years old, he was no longer the broken man who had stood outside the Great Hall watching his son crown the wrong woman, but he was also no longer young, no longer capable of decades more combat. "I will start it," Garrett said, "but I will train others to carry it forward. My son, these newly awakened wolves, the next generation. This cannot be about one man's crusade. It has to be about building something that outlasts all of us." Moira nodded. "Wisdom comes slowly to warriors, but it does come. There is a facility in Moscow, 300 suppressed Russian wolves. Someone should investigate." "Iron speaks Russian," Garrett said, "former military intelligence, and I suspect he has been looking restless lately." The old woman smiled. "Then perhaps you should have a conversation with him. Soon." She disappeared back into the forest, leaving Garrett with the weight of a new mission and the understanding that some fights never truly ended. They just changed shape, evolved, passed from one generation to the next. He walked back to where Iron was finishing the training session. The older man looked up, read something in Garrett's expression, and nodded. "She told you about the international programs?" Iron said. "Moscow specifically. 300 wolves. You interested?" Iron's grin was sharp. "I have been feeling like this work here is almost done, like we are training people to take over, rather than leading ourselves. Felt like maybe it was time to find a new fight." "Dangerous work," Garrett warned. "Foreign territory, unknown hostiles, could get ourselves killed." "Sounds familiar?" Iron said. "When do we leave?" "Not immediately. We need intelligence first, need to plan properly." Garrett looked at his friend. "But we are going. Both of us. One more mission." They spent the next 3 months preparing, gathering intelligence on the Moscow facility, identifying Russian wolves who might be sympathetic, learning everything they could about the program that had run parallel to Project Silverback, building a network of international contacts through wolves who had emigrated from Russia and maintained connections. The infiltration happened during winter. Garrett and Iron worked with 3 Russian wolves who had broken free from their own suppression and were hungry for justice. The operation took 72 hours of careful work, disabling security, copying files, planting evidence that would trigger internal investigations, getting out before being discovered. They succeeded. Barely. With close calls that reminded Garrett he was 59 years old, and combat was harder now than it had been at 20. But they got the files, got the evidence, got the names of 300 Russian wolves who thought they were defective, and they started the work of awakening them. Garrett worked with Iron for a year in Russia before returning home, long enough to establish networks that could continue without him, long enough to train local wolves to carry the mission forward, long enough to see the same pattern repeating that had played out in America. When he finally came home, his grandson was walking, talking in simple sentences, already showing signs of tactical thinking that made his grandfather proud. Elena had delivered a daughter, fierce and strong, who already displayed the confidence of a child raised by parents who loved each other genuinely. Marcus had consolidated his position as alpha through genuine leadership that prioritized truth over convenience. And the pack territories had changed. Awakened wolves had integrated into society, bringing with them tactical experience and mature wisdom. The old hierarchies based purely on bloodline were giving way to meritocracy based on competence and character. Garrett stood on the porch of the cabin he shared with Kira, watching the sunset over territory that finally felt like home. The woman he had reconnected with during the chaos of awakening had become his partner in the fullest sense. They had married quietly 6 months ago, two older warriors who had wasted enough time on regrets and were determined to make the years remaining count. She appeared beside him, stood close enough that their shoulders touched. "The Council wants you to train the next generation of awakeners," she said. "Wolves who will continue the international work. They are calling it the Silverback Initiative, turning Aldrich's weapon into something that liberates instead of enslaves." "Appropriate," Garrett said. "And I will do it. Train them properly. Make sure they understand it is not about glory or revenge. It is about giving people back what should never have been taken." His grandson's voice called from inside. "Grandpa, story time!" Garrett smiled, walked back into the cabin where his family waited, where 3 generations gathered around him. Marcus, Elena, little Garrett who was not so little anymore, the baby daughter who watched everything with intelligent eyes. "Tell us about the first shift," his grandson demanded, "about when you got your wolf." Garrett settled into his chair, began the story he had told a dozen times now. But this time he focused less on the violence and more on the lesson. "The important part," he said, "is not that I shifted at 58. The important part is that I had been whole all along. They tried to take my wolf, but they could not take who I was. They suppressed my power, but they could not suppress my will. And when I finally broke free, I learned something important." "What?" his grandson asked. "That strength is not about what you are born with. It is about what you refuse to give up. Your wolf matters, but your choices matter more. The power in your bloodline is a gift, but the power in your character is what makes you who you are." The boy nodded seriously, processing the words with the gravity of a child who knew he carried weight beyond his years. Marcus appeared in the doorway. "We have reports from the Beijing network. 50 more wolves awakened this month. The movement is spreading faster than we projected." "Good," Garrett said. "Then our work here is succeeding." He looked around the cabin, at his son who had learned to lead with truth, at his daughter-in-law who had survived because she refused to give up, at his grandchildren who would never know what it meant to believe themselves defective, at his mate who had found him when he finally became worth finding. This was what he had fought for, not glory, not recognition, not even justice, though that mattered. He had fought for the simple right to be complete, for wolves to know themselves truly instead of living with lies, for future generations to inherit a world built on truth instead of expedient falsehoods. 2,000 wolves worldwide still lived under suppression, but the networks were established, the training systems were in place, the next generation was ready to carry the mission forward. Garrett Blackwood was 59 years old. He had his wolf, he had his family. He had started something that would outlast him by generations. And standing in that cabin, surrounded by the people who mattered, Colonel Garrett Blackwood finally understood what his wife had tried to tell him all those years ago. The meaning of life was not in how long you survived. It was in what you chose to do with the time you had, in the battles you chose to fight, in the truth you chose to speak, even when silence was safer. He had been suppressed for 38 years, had believed himself defective, had carried shame like armor, but that man was gone now, burned away by the truth of what he actually was, what he had always been. Not broken, not flawed, not defective, just a warrior who had been robbed and had spent the last year and a half taking back what was stolen. Not just for himself, but for every wolf who had ever been told they were less than what they were. The work would continue. The mission would evolve. But tonight, surrounded by family and pack and the life he had built on truth, Garrett allowed himself to simply be grateful. For his wolf, for his family, for the chance to matter, for legacy measured not in victories but in the courage to begin things that outlasted you. His grandson climbed into his lap. Little Garrett Marcus Stoneheart, named for 2 warriors, already showing signs of the leader he would become. "You are going to do great things," Garrett said quietly. "You and your generation. You are going to finish what we started, free the rest, build something better." The boy looked up at him with those gold-flecked eyes. "Promise?" "Promise," Garrett said, "because that is what family does. We start the work, we teach the lessons, and then we trust the next generation to carry it forward." Outside, the sun dropped below the horizon. Inside, the cabin filled with warmth and conversation and the sound of pack, of family, of legacy being built one choice at a time. And somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, not in mourning, not in challenge, but in recognition. The suppressed were waking. The truth was spreading. The lies that had held for 40 years were crumbling. And Colonel Garrett Blackwood, awakened at 58, scarred by battles and enriched by family, knew that his contribution was complete. Not because the work was finished, but because he had built something strong enough to continue without him. That was legacy, that was purpose, that was enough. The end.